A stadium being demolished is one of the most heartbreaking events in football. Whilst many fans might see their team moving to a newer, more modern venue with gleeful anticipation, others lament the lost memories that they have made in the stands of the old ground. Newer stadiums also tend to be a bit sanitized and hyper-modern, and certainly do not have the same aura of the old footballing cathedrals like San Siro, for example. Among the new venues, the World Cup is the worst culprit, expecting host nations to quickly build high-standard stadiums in places where there are no top-flight football teams. Brazil's Mané Garrincha Stadium is now a bus car park, and the Stadium 974 in Qatar, which does not allude to the number of migrant workers killed during its construction, was supposed to be shipped off to some poor country with no footballing infrastructure and is still standing empty, with FIFA seemingly forgetting to follow up on the promise of the most sustainable stadium in the world. So with the world being littered with stadiums nobody wants, let's take a look at the most iconic stadiums to no longer be with us. In 1988, the Stadio Delle Alpi was built in just 2 years, just in time for the 1990 World Cup, going on to host one of the most iconic games in World Cup history, the semi-final between England and Germany, which ended in heartbreak for an England team who had been the revelation of the tournament. Sadly, this is where the good news ended for the Stadium of the Alps. The main issue with the stadium was the athletics track, which surrounded the pitch, with the Turin City Council intending it to become a multi-sport venue. However, in a classic tale of build now, think later, the track was never used, as it did not have the appropriate warm-up track. This caused the stadium to have very poor visibility, and when combined with its location on the outskirts of the city, meant that both Juventus and Torino fans grew to hate their own stadium. Therefore, only 19 years later, bulldozers made mincemeat of it. Built on the banks of the Manzanares River, the Estadio Vicente Calderon was initially named after the river which crosses through Madrid, before being renamed after Atletico Madrid's iconic president. Speaking of iconic, one of the coolest features I have ever seen on a stadium, or rather under a stadium in this case, was the M30 dual carriageway, Madrid's inner city ring, passing below one of the main stands. With Atletico Madrid's increasing success, the decision was made to move to a more modern and higher capacity ground, the Metropolitano. Officially named the Wanda Metropolitano after Wanda Sykes, Diego Simeone's favorite actress. The Vicente Calderon was demolished in 2020 with Wanda Sykes driving a bulldozer during the ceremony. Okay, I made up the parts about Wanda Sykes as I am incredibly bored, but I have spoken to her and she has clearly stated that if you do not like this video and subscribe to my channel, she would knock your house down. Moving on, the Parkstadion in Gelsenkirchen was also built right before a World Cup, namely the 1974 edition. It immediately became immortalized in FIFA folklore as the stadium where Yugoslavia set the highest ever score at the World Cup, beating Zaire 9-0. After the tournament ended, it became the home of Schalke until 2001. The last game played at the stadium nearly won the team a Bundesliga title. Schalke beat Unterhaching 5-3 in a very difficult game and were looking to Bayern's game against Hamburg to see if they would be crowned champions. Hamburg scored in the last minute of normal time and it seemed like the Parkstadion would have a proper send-off, before defender Patrick Andersson decided to score his only goal for Bayern in extra time, breaking the hearts of Schalke fans. After Schalke moved to the truly stunning Veltins Arena, the Parkstadion was partially demolished and renovated and now hosts Schalke's youth teams. I can hardly think of a stadium that is as clearly missed as the Arsenal Stadium. More popularly known as Highbury due to its location, and nicknamed the home of football by its adoring fans, the stadium played host to Arsenal from 1913 to 2006. The iconic Art Deco look came about during a redevelopment in the 30s, and further redevelopments followed in its long history. With the arrival of Arsene Wenger, the crowds of Highbury saw their team rise to one of the modern powerhouses of the Premier League, but also saw the issue of modernization hanging around their old stadium. With a capacity of only around 30,000, Arsenal were looking to maximize ticket sales but could not expand the stadium due to the fact that it was located in a very crowded area with houses surrounding the site. And since moving all of those people away would have cost way too much money, the decision was made to move to the Emirates, saddling the club with debt and closing the curtains on Arsenal's most successful era in recent memory. Arsene Wenger, I think, put it best when he said that the club left its soul at Highbury. Nowadays, part of the facade of the ground was incorporated into housing developments, and I bet they are quite a nice place to live in. Highbury's designer Archibald Leach also worked on Ayresome Park, the famous architect planning the construction of Middlesbrough's ground in 1903, which remained in usage until 1997. During its time in action, the stadium played host to one of the greatest upsets in World Cup history. At the 1966 edition of the tournament, North Korea, who played all of their group games at the ground, knocked out Italy with a 1-0 win in front of 18,000 spectators and advanced to the quarterfinals. Sadly, by the time the Premier League came around, the ground had become too old to maintain and Middlesbrough moved to Riverside Stadium. To commemorate their old ground, the gates of Ayerson Park have been erected outside the main entrance of the club's new ground. Whilst the other stadiums on this list hosted many memorable matches, none so far have hosted the biggest event in world football. The Råsunda Stadium was built in 1937 on the location of a former stadium and had been the home of the Swedish national team until 2013. In its long history, the stadium became the first of only two to host both the men's and the women's World Cup finals. In 1958, Pelé dazzled the world at only 17 years of age, leading his team to victory against host Sweden. And 41 years later, the USA defeated China to be crowned Women's World Cup champions. Since we talked about Highbury, it would be unfair not to mention their bitter rivals Tottenham. The story of the two clubs moving to new stadiums is quite similar, with Tottenham playing at White Hart Lane since 1898, and as the club became more and more successful in the modern era, the need for a bigger stadium became increasingly obvious. The name White Hart Lane is said to be derived from either the White Hart pub nearby or from the fact that Spurs supporters often met at the White Hart Lane railway station before games. Over the years, the stadium went through many redevelopments, but one item that remained the same was the cockerel statue that overlooked the pitch, which was moved to the club's offices shortly before the stadium was demolished in 2017. The demolition work started on the old ground just as the state-of-the-art Tottenham Hotspur Stadium was to be built roughly on the same site. This has of course come with a tremendous amount of debt, and it remains to be seen if Spurs can avoid the same fate as Arsenal. Right before Tottenham moved to their shiny new stadium, their London neighbours West Ham United also abandoned their historic stadium in favour of a more modern one. In 1904, West Ham merged with another local club called Boleyn Castle and took over their ground. 8 years later, they also rented the Green Street house and its grounds to be used as a training centre, which was known locally as Boleyn Castle, as it was rumoured that Anne Boleyn either stayed there or outright bought a house. Thus, the Boleyn Ground name was also used for the stadium itself, only to be replaced later with Upton Park, named after the area where it's located. West Ham played at the grounds all the way through 2016, with the only exception being a few games in 1941 when a V1 flying bomb damaged the southwest corner of the pitch. During the repairs, West Ham played at various other stadiums throughout London, winning 9 consecutive games, but losing 1-0 to Tottenham as soon as they returned to Upton Park. After the club moved to the London Stadium, the old ground was sold to a development company which turned it into a residential area. Another stadium that has hosted many illustrious events over the years is the Wankdorf Stadium in Bern. And I know that if you spell the name out in English, it sounds like a rude word, so just try to be civil. Built in 1925, it hosted Young Boys Bern until 2001, and its most illustrious game has to be the 1954 World Cup final. Dubbed the Miracle of Bern, the final saw an unfancied German team stun the seemingly invincible mighty Magyars 3-2 in one of the most iconic World Cup finals in history. In 2001, the Wankdorf was knocked down or knocked out depending on your preference, and the state-of-the-art Stade de Suisse Stadium was erected on its location. In 2020, due to many fans insisting on the name change, the name of the new stadium also changed to Wankdorf. As far as stadium demolitions go, not all of them have to be quick, irreversible affairs. In the case of Cathkin Park, it has been slowly demolished by the neglect and the elements since the late 60s. But has recently been at the center of many renovation efforts. Originally built in 1884, it became the home ground of Queen's Park, who had moved from their original stadium, Hampton Park, to the new venue, which was also named Hampton Park. In 1903, Queen's Park decided to build their own stadium, the current Hampton Park, and a new team, called 3rd Lanark AFC, moved into the old ground. Since 3rd Lanark had played at a stadium called Cathkin Park before, the ground was now renamed to New Cathkin Park and would serve as their home until 1967. Sadly, in 1967 the team was dissolved, and with no new teams wanting to move into the stadium, it stood abandoned with only the occasional amateur game taking place there. Since 2017, the reformed team, also called 3rd Lanark, alongside several volunteer groups, have laid out plans for a redevelopment. Barcelona's Camp Nou is one of the most recognizable stadiums in the world, although it has lost some of its shine as it's now known as the Spotify Camp Nou. Before moving to the current stadium in 1967, Barcelona had been playing at their first purpose-built stadium, the Camp de les Corts, since 1922. The driving force behind its construction was Joan Gamper, the man who founded Barcelona and who will surely be featured in one of my future videos. Just 3 years after its opening, the stadium was closed for 6 months after a controversial incident. Barcelona fans had jeered and booed the Spanish anthem and then applauded God Save the King, performed by a visiting Royal Marine band. Spain's dictator Primo de Rivera was quite upset about the whole thing and decided to exile Joan Gamper because he was allegedly promoting Catalan nationalism. Before we take a look at the last stadium on the list, I would like to include 2 more honorable mentions, namely Filbert Street, Leicester City's home for 111 years, whose site has been converted to housing for university students, with its main road being named Lineker Road after one of Leicester's most beloved sons, and Roker Park, where Sunderland played for 99 years. The connection to the stadium was so deep amongst the Black Cat supporters that their collective grief even sparked a play called I Left My Heart at Roker Park. Only one stadium could be worthy to close this list, and it is of course the Cathedral of Football, Wembley. Its full moniker, as stated by Pelé, reads Wembley is the Cathedral of Football, it is the capital of football, and it is the heart of football. During its time, it saw England beat Germany in the 1966 World Cup final, and the Germans subsequently defeat the Czech Republic team at Euro 1996. Built in 1922, it hosted every FA Cup final since 1923 until its demolition, including the White Horse Final, the stadium's first ever game. The FA had grossly underestimated the interest from fans wishing to see Bolton Wanderers play West Ham United, and around 300,000 of them squeezed themselves onto the terraces. 30 years later, an equally momentous final unfolded as Stanley Matthews finally got his hands on the FA Cup at his 3rd attempt. By the time everyone had recovered from their Y2K scares, it had become clear that England needed a new Wembley. So the famous Twin Towers were to be knocked down, with the last international match taking place between Germany and England, with Germany winning 1-0. The England national team moved into the new Wembley Stadium in 2007, and funnily enough, the first team to defeat them in their new ground was also Germany, providing further proof that when it comes to football, the Germans always have the last laugh. If you stayed until the end, thank you so much for watching. Drop a like and a subscribe if you feel like it. Let me know in the comments which of these stadiums would you like to bring back, and I'll see you next time.